Welcome to Deep Economic Thoughts with economist and best-selling author Ivan Illan. Once in a while, Ivan shares an unscripted, though potent, idea related to economics or the capital markets. This may be of interest to financial advisors and retail investors alike. Enjoy.
Greetings. This is Ivan Illan, and you're joining me on Deep Economic Thoughts. So this particular podcast is going to riff on a theme that the next Forbes article that I just approved the final draft with the editor yesterday should be coming out in the next week or so. This is also going to reference data that you can find on our website at alignwealth.com under For Advisors tab, and it's research highlights, and it's dated February 7th, 2024. And the first thing you'll notice there is this chart, which looks actually quite dramatic, and it is the U.S. output gap. And, frankly, a lot of financial advisors don't really know what the U.S. output gap is, much less investors, but it's a very interesting economic metric, and so the Forbes article, this research highlight, this podcast, and also there was a YouTube video on our YouTube channel, which you can link to through our website as well. All is discussing this particular metric. And one of the reasons why it's so important to be looking at it right now is that we have not seen this particular metric, the output gap measurement, so significantly high since before the dot-com crash. So anytime you see data hitting peaks or revisiting periods of extremity from other very interesting and perhaps even scary periods of time in the capital markets, it's always worth taking another look, making sure that you're keeping tabs on this particular metric. So what exactly is the output gap? Essentially, the output gap measures the amount above full capacity within the U.S. economy. And so you could think of it as overworking the U.S. economy, that there's a certain capacity for production of goods, production of services. There's only so much labor to go around. There's only so many inputs of production to go around. And somehow the economy is producing more than what is the natural capacity of the economy. And economists can look at this in a few different ways. One way in which we can look at it is that there is, in fact, so much demand that's occurring within the economy that it is pulling this production out of the economy beyond its natural or equilibrium rate of production. Now, anytime you're doing that, anytime you're stressing something out, that's going to generally be unsustainable. There's only so much that you can push something. Think of a race car engine. I love going to race. I just got back from the 24 Hours of Daytona a couple of weeks ago. And this is a major endurance race, and the whole point, just like Le Mans, it's 24 hours of a car driving at full tilt in a street track, and they rotate every few hours a driver, and it is a true test of the machine and the man, or the woman, as of course there are now female drivers. And so it is a test of driver and of machine. And sometimes when we're watching this race, a car blows up. It just happens because It's being run at full tilt, and it's being pushed well beyond its normal capacity to provide transportation from point A to point B. And so I really liken that. I think it's a good metaphor for what we find in this output gap phenomenon. And so when we see periods like we do right now, and if you go and look at the chart on our website, you will see that boy, does it look like it is in an extreme area, in an extreme state of significantly high overproduction. And so, of course, this is highly inflationary. This is a highly inflationary pressure within the economy. So much demand pushing an economy beyond its natural capacity to produce. And so is there any wonder why we continue to see inflation figures at these relatively high, sustained levels? Not looking like we're getting close to that 2% long-term rate. That's, of course, what the Federal Reserve desires. And it's important to note that even getting back to that 2% rate, so this process of going from high rates of inflation like 9%, 7%, 6%, 5%, most recently, again, 3%, getting back down to 2%, this is just called disinflation. So we're still getting growth of prices. Prices are still increasing. The price level of things is still going up. It's just going up at a slower rate of growth. That's disinflation. So you have, 22+% over the past 3 years of overall price level inflation, referring to the CPI. So that's already a massive amount of price growth. And so just getting back to 2%, okay, that may be kind of nice, but there's still going to be a world of hurt and pain for a lot of families and Americans who are struggling to make ends meet. And that is a huge concern. And so the premise that I posit is that disinflation, even though it's such a nice idea, given this extraordinary stress that the economy has been under in terms of overproduction, producing beyond its capacity, a recession is actually a most welcome event for the U.S. economy. And the hope is that a recessionary environment would actually present an opportunity for deflation, where prices actually can come down. And everybody certainly would enjoy that. Lower prices. And prices aren't going to go back to, 2019 levels, but even, a 10% decline from these massive inflated prices we've seen would be quite welcome and would be very good for the economy in the long run. However, that will equate to some pain and some economic malaise and discomfort. And so this is what you are hearing about, whether we're going to have a soft landing or a hard landing or, some kind of sideways skidding off a slick ice runway landing. It's anyone's guess how it can play out, but this is why we look at metrics like this, like the output gap, to give us an indication of really how nasty things currently are and how extraordinary things currently are and how inflationary still things very much are. And of course, this backdrop of higher interest rates, which are meant to tamp down on inflation, corporations and CFOs, they're really having to pivot and struggle and get creative on how are they going to meet these maturing debts that they have. And they have only so much cash flow and free cash flow, and they have only so much ready cash on hand. And so payrolls become one of the most flexible items in the expense line item of a company in order to free up some cash flow. And so this is where unemployment gets impacted. And so really this is about watching what happens with the unemployment rate. I think we're beginning to see more and more notifications of layoffs and large and widespread layoffs. We're seeing many more defaults, certainly big name and high profile real estate defaults. And so there are, apparently deals to be had there, but a lot of people aren't occupying those office buildings, for example. The rates of occupancy are still not where they were pre-pandemic levels. People have really adjusted. So to a new way of life and working from home a certain number of days a week, for example. So there's a lot of factors at play. Again, this is just focusing on the U.S. output gap and this particular metric and how curious it is. And there's this other little piece of research on this highlight on the website, which compares U.S. public debt growth versus U.S. real GDP growth over the past decade. And it just never really ceases to amaze me that public debt in the United States has grown 88% over the past 10 years, whereas the GDP, net of inflation, so just real GDP, has grown 36%. So talk about wild spending at a government level. And by the way, most of that debt and percent change occurred. It was kind of in lockstep. GDP and debt were kind of growing very similar to one another until 2020. And since 2020, there has just been a skyrocket upwards percentage change of U.S. public debt relative to GDP. And if there is any indication of how unsustainable something could be, it would be the issuance of more and more and more and more debt to finance many fiscal measures within the economy. There's only so much money to go around. And obviously our deficits reflect that we're not collecting a lot of income to keep up with those payments. And interest payments on federal debt is now meant to be, number 2 or number 3 line item, just behind entitlement payments, Social Security payments. So interest payments are going to be massive and unbelievable, and the Federal Reserve knows this as well. So there's pressure certainly to reduce rates to some extent. But even with all of this, we haven't seen risk spreads within fixed income markets really reflect any of this risk. Everything seems so hunky-dory. And it reminds me of the old adage, how do people or businesses go bankrupt? The answer is very slowly and then all at once. That's all for this month. Please feel free to reach out at alignwealth.com. That's ALIGNE wealth.com, and submit any questions there that you may have. Always happy to answer them. Take care.
For more deep thoughts, please subscribe to this podcast. Also, please feel free to visit www.ivanillan.com to submit questions or topics through the contact page. Until next time, keep thinking deeply.